Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Field and Garden Podcast. It is your friend in flowers, Lisa Mason Ziegler, and I am glad that you have dropped in, taken a moment, taken a pause, or maybe listening alongside while you're doing some task, which is what I absolutely love to do. So friends, if this is your first time here, I just really want to take a moment to welcome you and encourage you to explore all the resources and opportunities that we have for you over at thegardenersworkshop.com, who is what makes this podcast possible, right? It can be your go-to place for education and support, as well as the same tools, seeds, and supplies that you hear me mention and using here on the podcast when I'm teaching. So check out thegardenersworkshop.com. You can sign up for our farm news that'll really keep you in the loop on everything going on, because friends, we have a lot going on. We've just created this amazing platform to help lead and guide you along your cut flower journey. And it's our passion. So we would love to have you sign up so we can keep you in the loop. So today I want to talk about smaller is better. And I am going to kind of claim that for my 2025 goal. And I'm really reminded of this as I've been suffering these last 2 years from just a lot of things I didn't remember suffering from back when we were in even higher production, right? And then I was reminded to look back into my new book, the Cut Flower Handbook. On page 11, y'all, I actually wrote about this in the book, and it's reading this paragraph, which I'm going to read to you, has just kind of realigned me, and it's like a wake-up call for me, and I can't wait to implement it as we're heading into 2025. And I've already taken the first steps. So first thing I want to do is actually read to you from page 11 out of the Cut Flower Handbook. The name of the section is the Cut Flower Concept. This is like how a cut flower garden works and functions, and how we do things to make it not function and to make it function. So here we go. The size of the cutting garden has a direct impact on success or failure. The tendency is to think a large garden is needed to produce enough flowers for the need or want. But the truth is, when it comes to a cutting garden, smaller is better. Going small and following the practice of a cutting garden will provide more cut flowers from a smaller space for a longer period of time. End of quote. All right, so the first thing that this all spurred is me thinking back to when I first started flower farming back in 1998 and the few years following that, where I was forced to squeeze more flowers from less space. And how well I did it. That's where I built my reputation, y'all, for the perfect blossoms. And why did I have perfect blossoms? Because I was cutting them constantly, moving them all constantly. And back then, my whole property was only 1.17 acres. That included my home and several outbuildings. And I just didn't have much space. And I was always cramming more into less. And I was cutting it so very, very hard, because you may have heard me mention, my goal when I started my business, and that I kept throughout my business, was always to have more customers than I had flowers. I mean, there's just nothing more heartbreaking than growing all the flowers and then not having anywhere for them to go, right? And so back then I was merciless on succession planting. I didn't know that's what it was called back then. But as soon as a bed or a half a bed just wasn't producing what it should or what it had been producing, I was quick to rip it out and plant what I had waiting in the wings to be planted, right? So I was always planting more, pulling more, planting more and pulling more. And that just led me to literally work the space that I had at maximum efficiency. And that efficiency is what I've really seen, that we have really just let go. So through time, and as I got more room, so I'm so bad about remembering years, y'all, but it was probably about 12 years ago, believe it or not, in the middle of the city, totally surrounded by residents except on one side of my property was a horse boarding farm. It was me and him in the middle of the city, right? Everything else has houses on it. I had the opportunity to purchase 1.5 acres of that bordering farm before it got developed. And so all of a sudden, overnight, I went from having these 2 small 1/4 acre gardens that I was just, talk about getting blood out of a turnip, y'all. I was squeezing it hard, right? Well, overnight, I went into having another 1.5 acres. That was bigger than my entire property that I had currently. Plus, believe it or not, as that farm was going to be sold and developed, we knew that was going to be like a 5-year process for that to happen. So Oliver, the owner of that land next to me, allowed me to actually grow on an additional acre, which didn't belong to me. We put fence around it and just made it part of our farm. So I went from overnight, boom, having very little land to having, oh my gosh, more land than I ever allowed myself to dream of. And I instantly became less efficient for a whole lot of reasons. This is the time frame that I bought my tractor and the bed maker and a tiller, because the team that was working with me, which was basically Bobo and one other person, said there's no way we can do by hand all this bed making and all this planting and everything we were doing on that scale. So things started happening then. I started scaling my business, and this is what they call growing pains, y'all. You realize you can't do more without investing more. But that's a whole nother story. But the bottom line was I became incredibly less efficient. We went from, grossing, and this was, 20 years ago. We went from grossing $66,000 from that 1/4 acre to not grossing, and because you're thinking, oh my gosh, 66,000, 1/4 acre. Now I just got another 1.5 acres. That'll be awesome. It didn't work out that way, y'all. And it was all rooted in becoming less efficient. So, and I also want to just mention here, as you age and grow your business and maybe your off-farm income grows and you just start having more cash flow, you also lose efficiency if you allow it. This can be applied to all parts of life, right? So when this less efficiency happens, it just spirals out of control, because as you get bigger, you just start digging this hole of less and less efficiency. And when you are wallowing in that less efficiency, you can't even see to the top of the hole to get out. You're just so caught up in, you never get it all planted, you never get it all cut, you never get it all weeded, because now all of a sudden you aren't a weed preventer, you are a weeder, and that is a battle you will never win, friends. And so as I became less efficient, chores just got totally out of control. So that weed prevention efficiency, the whole bottom line to weed prevention is doing things in a timely manner, meaning, for instance, that you prep beds and get them either planted so that a canopy of plants are growing in the bed to prevent suppress weeds growing, or you get film on the bed, or you mulch in whatever way you're going to do it. If you just tear down gardens and then don't get back to them for 2 or 3 weeks, well, guess what happens during those 2 or 3 weeks? Weeds grow like crazy. Then you have to then deal with those weeds again before you can take the next step. The less efficient you are, the more work happens, right? So weed prevention becomes a thing of the past, for sure. Then harvesting, oh my goodness, these last few years, as my business has evolved and we went from a high production farm to a low production farm as we catered to just very specific customers, which for us, we scaled back to 23 florists to 2 of our highest volume florists. We gave up supermarkets, we gave up farmers markets, and we just catered to our bouquet subscription and our on-farm market. So the last 4 years of production were to just 2 florists, 2 or 3 florists, I guess, and our bouquet subscription and our members only market. And then we came to a point about 3 years ago where we said, you know what? We are just all in on the education part of educating and equipping cut flower gardeners and growers, especially those that are just starting out. So we stopped selling flowers, right? Because that's a whole another can of worms, right? And we did not need that. That was not the main source of our business now. The main source of our business is the education and equipping people to do what we've done for the last 2.5 decades. When we did that, I didn't scale back as much as I should have the volume of flowers we were growing. And that was so easy to do because we had all this space. And it was basically just became a helter-skelter. While I was still I'm a huge succession planner, right? I mean, that's my superpower, and that is the superpower of every flower farm, to have consistent, long, quality supply. I didn't have a tight rein on my succession planting because I had all this space. I mean, I was just able to, Bobo would say, well, we planted those warm season tender annuals, but there's still a lot of plants left over. Why don't we plant them in the back garden to have as backup, or to just have, or they would have just planted them. And it all seems like that is not a big deal. Oh my goodness, y'all. It just leads to so many issues. First off, for me, you're investing in labor to cut all these flowers that you don't really need. And then when you cut them, you paid to get them cut. Then you have them, what do you do with them? Then you pay to do something else with them. I mean, it's just like this vicious treadmill that you get on, hamster wheel that you can't get off of. And in addition to that, it's really hard to control quality in this less efficient hamster wheel that you're on. The reason that I was so well known for my high quality is because we were cutting everything so hard so often. There was no pest and disease and bug damage. Nothing had a chance to sit in the garden, and weather wasn't affecting our blooms. But when there's so much to cut and stuff, they don't cut as hard. When you've got a whole bunch of, let's just say Rudbeckia. Rudbeckia is an incredibly prolific producer, right? And we grow 9 different Rudbeckias. It's a cool flower. And when you have a lot of them on a planting, even if it's not a volume planting, it's still hard to get them all cut. Well, when you have so much more to cut than you really need, then you start cutting less of individual plants, blooms, and that leads to older blooms on your next harvest. See what I'm talking about? It's this vicious cycle. It all comes back to behavior, y'all. I mean, it's all about behaviors. So, and I am the worst about overextending myself. And I got really good at it in the beginning. Then I was pretty good at it in high production, but I let it spiral out of control these last few years. And let me tell you, it's a new day for 2025. And that's where I'm heading with this. And I will say that during this out of control, growing more than we needed, have more space than I really needed, we still continued to succession plant. But I can see, and because I'm so experienced in succession planting, I was still able to keep on track. I totally see how people that are overplanting can't reel in and dial in their succession planting. I'm telling you, friends, planting less is better. So 2025, we are getting back to what made me what I was. This flower farmer that squeezed a lot on a little space in top quality, low investment, high return, getting more flowers from less space, which leads to less time and investment. And friends, that's where the bottom line really, really comes in. So moving into 2025, we've already started it. We have one block of beds. There's 10 beds. They're 75 feet long, and they are for my cool flowers. They are for the fall planting, which is already planted, and there's a few that are still to be planted, but there is space for them. And I have 2 beds amongst those 10 beds that are for my very early spring cool flower plantings. And we are not planting flowers anywhere on this farm beyond that for cool flowers. And the opposite side of that garden has the same 10 beds that'll be for my warm season tender annuals for the first spring planting. And I mean, we are gonna squeeze this turnip and get back to easier, more efficient planting, weeding, maintaining, netting, harvesting, the whole enchilada, y'all. And I hope that you're going to come along with me on this. And Bobo and I have high hopes of really monitoring the volume of harvest that we're going to get out of this. I believe this is 1/5 of an acre. I'm doing this from memory, but I believe that this garden is like 75 feet long by 120 wide, I think. And then my tunnel runs down the middle of it. And so we are all about smaller is better, because I am a true believer in that. It allows you to really get your systems down. I mean, that's what I did in the beginning, right? When I first started flower farming, I was forced to get my systems down. Then I was able to scale into high production, and we did pretty good in high production. But we were not as efficient as we were when we were a smaller farm. I mean, why would you plant an entire acre when you can squeeze the same amount of flowers for less work, less labor, less investment on a half an acre, right? And it's so hard to remember this, y'all. It is just so difficult. Bigger is better, but not necessarily in everything. And a cutting garden is actually one of those. So I hope you'll walk along with me, and I'll be speaking of this, and I'm sure posting on social media about the pains. I mean, it all comes back to behaviors, right? You know, I just heard this the other day, and that like over 50 or 60% of people that gross $150,000 to $200,000 a year, which is quite a nice income, live paycheck to paycheck. And that is the proof that it's behavior, y'all. We overspend, we get caught up, and it's the same thing in starting a business and maintaining a business. It is so easy to go down these rabbit holes and feel like you gotta have, need to have. It is the same old boring stuff, doing it over and over and over again, that builds our businesses, builds our gardens, and builds our wealth, very simply. But it's hard to stay simple, y'all, in this world where all of these objects are being dangled in front of us. So smaller is better is my motto for 2025 in a lot of different things. In business, in my cutting garden, getting back to real basics. And I hope you'll come along with me, and I'd love to hear from you about that. So friends, head on over to gardenersworkshop.com if you want to explore our many resources, both free and paid, as well as our fully stocked online garden shop where you can find all the tools, seeds, and supplies, and of course my books. I would love to sign a book for you, or if you would like personalized messaging in the book, I would be happy to do that for your gift giving as well. So friends, until we meet again, and let's remember, smaller is better. Ciao, folks.